Welcome to Moonlight Audiobook, where mysteries speak in whispers and shadows hold their breath. I'm Branden Smith, your host, and tonight, we step quietly into a story of secrets written not in ink, but in warning. When Hercule Poirot receives a letter predicting a crime before it happens, and signed only with the name number 23, he begins a descent into a riddle of forgotten houses, vanished names, and memories that refuse to stay buried. This is not just a case of deduction. It is a case of presence, of absence, of a number that should not exist, and yet demands to be heard. So settle in. Let the lights dim. Let the clock tick. And as always, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? It's always a pleasure to see the Moonlight circle grow. Now, let us begin. Hercule Poirot, the letters from number 23. Chapter 1, The Ink That Arrived Early. It began with a letter, as quiet mysteries often do. A plain envelope, cream-colored and unmarked except for the address. Hercule Poirot, Flat 203, 14B, Faraday Street, London. No return name. No postmark. And yet, it had arrived as though hand-delivered, though the doorman swore he'd seen no one. Poirot turned it over slowly in the lamplight. His eyes, ever suspicious of the seemingly ordinary, narrowed at the unusually fine paper and the strange, heavy scent, faintly metallic, like rusted typewriter ribbon and rain-soaked brick. Inside, a single sheet, typewritten with surgical precision. Mr. Poirot, a crime is coming. Thursday, 6:15 p.m., at the corner of Harper Lane and Willow Ridge. You will know it by the sound of 3 chimes and the color of the gloves. It will not be what it seems. Sincerely, number 23. Poirot folded the letter once, then again. He did not speak for nearly a full minute. Then, quietly to himself, he said, "It is too early for this nonsense. I have not yet had my tisane." By noon, the letter lay in his coat pocket, carefully smooth, and Poirot found himself walking the length of Harper Lane. It was not a street of mystery, at least not on the surface. A tobacconist's, a modest bakery, 2 closed barber shops, and a row of townhouses that bore the same weariness as so many corners of the city now did. He stood for a long while at the intersection of Harper and Willow Ridge, looking at the bricks, the gutters, the sky. Nothing spoke to him. No number 23 in sight. He counted again. The addresses leapt from 21 to 25, an architectural oddity, perhaps, or something torn down long ago. But Poirot did not believe in coincidence. That Thursday, he arrived at the corner at precisely 6:10 p.m. The street was still. Evening fog clung low to the ground, creeping over boot heels and doorsteps. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang. 6 o'clock. Poirot stood beneath the weak light of a gas lamp, its glass fogged from the inside. Then, chime, chime, chime. A clock somewhere nearby, not towered, not public, but perhaps private, marked the minute. And then Poirot saw them. 2 figures emerging from opposite ends of the street. One tall and hurried, the other deliberate, pausing every few steps. As they approached the intersection, Poirot observed carefully. One wore 10 gloves, the other, none. Then a shriek pierced the quiet. A young woman came stumbling from an alley, her shawl torn, her hands bloody. She collapsed near the curb. Both men stopped. A moment of chaos followed. Poirot moved quickly, intercepting the taller man, who had instinctively turned to flee. "No, monsieur," Poirot said gently, but firmly. "You will wait." The police arrived 15 minutes later. The woman, bruised but alive, insisted her attacker had fled behind her, not ahead. The taller man, though startled, had only moved in panic. His name was Everett Dames, a solicitor's clerk. He had no weapon, no motive, and, According to both his boss and his mother, no capacity for violence. The other man, George Havelock, a pensioner and chess player, had seen nothing but a blur in the fog. And yet, Poirot had been watching, and Poirot was not convinced. Not of guilt, but of intention. Back at his flat, Poirot removed the letter once more. The color of the gloves, the 3 chimes, the time, precise. But it had not been a warning of a crime. It had been a warning of its confusion, and someone had wanted him there to see it. The next morning, another envelope arrived. Same cream paper, same ink. This time, Mr. Poirot, you are punctual. The trial of perception has begun. Tuesday, 4:45. Bowlinghurst Square. Bring no police. They are part of the problem. Number 23. Poirot leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. A smile, ever so faint, appeared beneath the twin mustaches. So, we begin in earnest. Chapter 2. The Puzzle in the Square. The sky above Bowlinghurst Square was the color of damp linen, pale, tired, and untrustworthy. Poirot arrived 10 minutes early, as was his custom. He did not walk directly into the square. Instead, he observed it from beneath the overhang of a tobacconist's awning just across the street, hidden in plain sight. It was a quiet place, the square. Too quiet for Tuesday at this hour. The old stone fountain at its center had not flowed in years. Its cherubic centerpiece, once charming, now looked down upon the paving stones with a cracked, weathered frown. A man read a newspaper on a bench near the west side. A boy kicked a ball idly near the corner where the hedge curved. A nursemaid adjusted the blanket of a child's pram beneath a tree. Ordinary figures in an ordinary park. But Poirot had not come for the ordinary. He had come for the arrangement. At precisely 4:45 p.m., a gust of wind swept across the square. The pages of the newspaper fluttered. The boy's ball rolled into the fountain basin. The nursemaid looked up and then froze. A scream followed, not of terror, but of shock. Poirot was already walking briskly into the square. A man, well-dressed, perhaps 50, with ash-gray hair, lay slumped against the far side of the fountain. One shoe off, no hat, and a deep red stain spreading across the front of his shirt. Poirot reached him in seconds. The man's eyes flickered, just once, then closed. He was dead. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed. Poirot held them at bay with the quiet but commanding presence that followed him wherever he went. Though the letter had warned against involving the police, a constable had already been summoned. Inspector Japp, a familiar face to Poirot, arrived shortly after, his coat barely buttoned and his breath visible in the growing chill. Another coincidence, Poirot? He asked, eyeing the body. Poirot said nothing. He reached instead for a small slip of paper that had been tucked neatly into the victim's coat pocket. A man must be seen to die, or else it may be believed he lived. Number 23. The man was later identified as Dr. Felix Rennick, a psychologist and lecturer in moral philosophy. He had no enemies, no debts, no recent medical complaints. The cause of death was a single stab wound beneath the sternum, precise, almost surgical. No weapon was found. Poirot sat with a note in hand later that evening, alone with his thoughts and the quiet tick of the mantel clock. A man must be seen to die, he repeated. It was not a clue, he realized. It was a message. Number 23 had not merely predicted this event. They had designed it, and then written Poirot into the script. At 10:15 that night, another letter arrived. No knock, no footfall, just the envelope, resting like a decision on the windowsill. Poirot opened it carefully. You chose not to stop it. That was wise. The death was not your failure. It was his. Do you understand now why some things must happen? We will speak again soon. Number 23. For the first time since this strange game had begun, Poirot did not immediately file the letter away. He did not rise to pace, or even to analyze. Instead, he remained seated. Still, thoughtful, and very quietly, he said aloud, "None, it is not murder you want me to solve." He stayed at the fireplace. "It is a principle." Chapter 3. The Room with One Window. The following morning, Poirot visited the offices of Dr. Felix Rennick, not at the request of the police, but at the urging of his own suspicion. Rennick's rooms occupied the third floor of an aging Georgian building in Bloomsbury. The brass nameplate on the door was polished, the hallway silent. The receptionist, a pale woman in her 50s with a voice like crushed silk, informed Poirot that the office had been closed since the doctor's death, but that the police had not taken everything. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the door. She hesitated, then nodded, just for a moment. The room smelled of lemon oil and old wool. The furniture was sparse: a desk, 2 leather chairs, a coat rack, and one wall lined with shelves of dense books and clinical grey bindings. But what caught Poirot's attention was the window. There was only one, and it looked not out to the street, as he'd expected, but into an interior courtyard, hemmed in by brick walls and unreachable light. There were no flowers, no benches, only shadow. Poirot moved to the desk. Its surface was clean, save for one object left behind, a small, bound notebook. He opened it carefully. Each page bore a name, a time, a note, the usual codes of a doctor's day. But one entry, dated just 3 days before Rennick's death, was different. It read, "Subject claims to hear typewritten words while dreaming. Suggests they are not dreams but messages. There is no number 23, she says, but it keeps writing to me." The name of the patient had been redacted, scratched out so thoroughly the paper tore. Poirot's brow furrowed. "So, Doctor, you were warned, too." That night, Poirot did not sleep. Instead, he returned to the stack of letters he'd received, both from number 23 and others he'd collected over the years. He spread them across his desk, aligning the fonts, spacing, and the weight of each keystroke. The letters from number 23 had all been typed on the same machine, an older Remington number 5, judging by the distinctive curl of the lowercase r. He knew such details well. Poirot understood the subtle languages most ignored, the slant of ink, the pressure of keys, the silence between lines. But something else bothered him more than the typewriter. It was the tone. Number 23 did not write as a killer. They wrote as a philosopher. Poirot's theory began to crystallize the next morning when the third letter arrived, delivered again without notice, resting, this time, on the inside of his apartment door. "There's a woman at St. Bernardine's Hospital. She walks only in circles. She speaks only in riddles. She was the first. Her room has one window. Number 23. Poirot was already putting on his coat before the final line was read. St. Bernardine stood like a tired sentinel on the edge of the Thames. A converted priory, now a private psychiatric hospital. It was made of cold stone and long corridors. Poirot was granted access without much resistance. His name carried weight, even here. Sister Eloise, the attending nurse, led him through a wing of private rooms. "We call her Miss Violet," she said, "though we've no idea if that's her real name. She was admitted over 6 months ago. No family, no address. She was found wandering near the docks, repeating a phrase about letters and houses that don't exist." Poirot entered the room slowly. Miss Violet sat by the window. She was in her mid-30s, perhaps younger, her features weathered by silence. She turned her head but did not speak. Poirot sat beside her. No notebook, no pen, only presence. Minutes passed. Then, at last, she whispered, "I didn't send the first letter." Poirot waited. She continued, as if from memory, "But I did send the second. And I would have stopped, if I hadn't seen what came after." "What came after?" Poirot asked softly. Her eyes met his. "The house that isn't there." He left the hospital with more questions than answers, and one phrase ringing louder than the rest. The house that isn't there. Back at home, Poirot pulled out the London Municipal Archives and began to study the records for Harper Lane. And there it was, buried in a footnote, in a ledger from 1913. House number 23, demolished following the fire of March 12th. Deemed structurally unsound. Lot left unassigned. He leaned back in his chair. So the house had existed, but no longer. And yet, someone still claimed it. That evening, a fourth letter arrived. This one smaller. The paper darker. Inside, your perception sharpens. But the fog must still lift. Thursday, 2 a.m. Return to Harper Lane. You will not be alone. Number 23. Poirot folded the letter once, then extinguished the lamp. "No," he said to the silence. "I imagine I won't be." Chapter 4. The fog that stood still. The fog in London can deceive even the most meticulous of men. It is not always the rolling blanket we imagine, thick and wet and swallowing gas lamps whole. Sometimes it is thinner, quieter, and crueler. It sits just above the cobblestones like breath held too long, unmoving. A fog that listens. At 1:57 a.m. on a Thursday morning, Hercule Poirot stood once more at the corner of Harper Lane and Willow Ridge, his silhouette sharp beneath the dim glow of an old street lamp. He wore his heaviest overcoat, dark brown gloves, and a scarf knotted neatly beneath his chin. He did not shiver. The cold, like mystery, was an old companion. The letter from number 23 had been clear. Return to Harper Lane. 2 a.m. You will not be alone. There was no signature needed anymore. The words themselves were enough. Cold, purposeful, and just vague enough to unsettle the rational mind. Poirot had no doubt he was being watched. The street was still. Shops long closed, windows dark. No footsteps, no distant carriage. Even the wind held its breath. Across from him, where number 23 had once stood, the empty lot looked the same. Lifeless, fenced, partially overgrown. Yet something had changed. A light, not from a lantern, nor from a nearby window, but from the ground. Poirot crossed slowly, his boots clicking in crisp rhythm. At the center of the lot, beneath brittle vines and cracked flagstone, something faintly glowed, a silver outline, like chalk but metallic, forming the shape of a door. Just a rectangle, unlatched, unopened, and yet unmistakable. A memory, perhaps, or a signal. He crouched, inspecting the perimeter of the outline. No power source, no mechanism, but Poirot knew better than to trust only the visible. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small mirror, a habit from younger days. He held it above the rectangle, and then he saw it, not in the ground, but in the reflection, a shadow, standing just behind him. He turned swiftly. Nothing there. He held the mirror up again. The shadow was gone. Poirot did not believe in ghosts, but he did believe in stagecraft. At exactly 2 a.m., a whisper cut the silence. Not a voice, not even a word, but a scrape, like metal across stone. Poirot stepped back, eyes scanning the alley to his left. There, just beyond a crumbling side wall, a figure emerged. It was a woman, late 30s, hair bound in a tight braid, a coat far too large for her. She carried a bundle beneath one arm. When she saw Poirot, she didn't stop. She simply paused, turned her head slightly, and said, "You're not early this time." "I am precisely on time, Mademoiselle," Poirot replied gently. She gave a faint smile and held out the bundle. Wrapped in rough cloth was a typewriter, an old Remington No. 5. Poirot took it carefully. "Where did you get this?" The woman shrugged. "It used to be mine. Then it wasn't. Then I think it wanted to be yours. Your name? He asked. She hesitated. Call me Eleanor. It's close enough. Poirot studied her expression. Eyes that had seen too much. Shoulders that carried too much. She was not mad. She was exhausted. Eleanor, Poirot said. Do you know who writes the letters? I know who thinks they do, she replied. But they only transcribe. The real message is older. Poirot frowned. Older than who? She leaned in. Older than the house. Later that morning, Poirot sat at his writing desk with a typewriter before him. It was a beautiful machine. Brass keys, glossy frame, still functional. A small monogram had been etched into the side in nearly invisible ink, VL. Violet. Miss Violet, the patient at St. Bernardine's. She had mentioned dreams that spoke like typewriters. Letters that arrived without being sent. Poirot placed a blank sheet into the carriage and began to type. Not a note, but a question. Who are you? He left it there. 3 hours passed. When he returned from breakfast and errands, the page had changed. A single line had been added. I'm the archivist of things no longer spoken. Poirot exhaled slowly. Alice. This was no longer a puzzle of the present. This was a conversation across time. Poirot brought the typewriter to Inspector Japp that afternoon. The Scotland Yard man was unimpressed. So now it's haunted typewriters? Japp asked, raising an eyebrow. Should I call in a priest or a locksmith? Poirot, ever patient, opened a ribbon panel and showed him the serial number, an identifier tracing the machine back to a purchase in 1912. Registered to Marguerite Lafontaine, a French schoolteacher who'd vanished after the Harper Lane fire. She was the tenant of number 23, Poirot explained. Japp folded his arms. All right, so this typewriter belonged to someone who lived in a house that no longer exists. Exactly, said Poirot. And someone's sending you letters from a ghost address, via a machine from a missing tenant, tied to a woman in a hospital who dreams about it. OUI. There was a silence. Then Japp sighed. God help me, Poirot. I'm listening. That evening, Poirot took the Remington to Miss Violet at St. Bernardine's. He placed it on the table before her. She blinked. Then, slowly, her fingers reached toward it. She began to type. The nurses said she hadn't used her hands in weeks. Key by key, the words formed. I remember the fire. I was in the room. I wasn't supposed to be. Poirot watched. She never looked up. Her breathing was steady. Then, they were not trying to kill anyone. They were trying to erase something. But it didn't bang. She paused. Nothing ever does at number 23. By midnight, Poirot had charted a full timeline. March 12, 1913, fire at number 23 Harper Lane. Tenant, Marguerite Lafontaine, teacher, typewriter owner. Neighbor witness accounts vanished from records. Land registry stopped numbering the house after its demolition. Miss Violet, born 1914, speaks of dreams involving 23. The letters begin in present day, addressed to Poirot. He noticed something else. Every 23rd of the month, a corresponding letter had arrived, whether before or after an incident. It was not random. It was ritual. The next letter came on the morning of April 23rd, tucked not into an envelope but pressed between the typewriter keys. It read, You will not understand until you stand inside the room again. Even if the room no longer stands. The mirror is the last piece. It remembers what walls forget. Return at dusk. Bring no one. Number 23. Poirot stayed at the letter long after it was read. This was no longer a simple crime. It was an invitation. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the soot-stained rooftops of Harper Lane, Poirot stood once more at the ruins of number 23. The fog had returned, but this time it was not still. It moved, circled, hung like a curtain drawn part way. Poirot stepped into the overgrown lot. He waited. And then, without wind, without cause, a door creaked open. There was no house, only a doorway, standing alone. And Poirot, against every instinct, against every rule, stepped through it. What he saw defied explanation. He was inside. A hallway, scorched and cracked, stretched before him. Wallpaper peeled like parchment. A chandelier hung above, twisted with time. And at the far end, a room lit with flickering gold. He entered. There, in the center, stood a single mirror. Oval, framed in iron, and in its reflection, not Poirot, but the room as it once was. Whole, bright, occupied. He saw Marguerite. He saw a girl, Violet. He saw the fire begin, not from outside, but from beneath the floorboards. A trap, not an accident. Erasure. Someone had wanted this house gone, and failed. Because memory, once formed, cannot be burned, only buried. Poirot stepped back. The mirror cracked. A single hairline fracture, right down the middle. Then the door behind him shut, and the house vanished once more. Chapter 5. The Archivist's Ledger. There are memories that resist time, not because they are profound or poetic, but because they were never permitted to end. Such memories linger like unsent letters, forever addressed, never opened. On the morning after the house at number 23 appeared and vanished before his very eyes, Hercule Poirot awoke not with fear, nor with confusion, but with resolve. He sat by the window of his flat, nasing a dark roast and watching the city drift in its usual rhythm. Carriages passed. Bells chimed. Somewhere, a baker's chimney exhaled flower-scented smoke. All ordinary. But Poirot had been somewhere extraordinary. He had seen a house that no longer existed, a mirror that remembered what walls had forgotten, and perhaps most unsettling, he had seen himself standing inside something that should not be. Not memory, not imagination, not even madness. Something else. Poirot's first act that morning was to return the mirror fragment he had managed to retrieve from the site, small, jagged, and inexplicably warm to the touch. He placed it upon his desk beside the other relics, the typewriter from Marguerite Le Fontaine, the letters from number 23, the journal scribblings from Dr. Rennick, and the photographs of the missing blueprints. The pieces were gathering, but the shape of the puzzle remained elusive. Inspector Japp, when called to discuss this latest development, brought with him a mixture of skepticism and irritation. A house that appears and disappears. Japp asked, thumbing through Poirot's notes. That's a new one, even for you. Poirot merely sipped his tea. I do not require you to believe in the supernatural, mon ami. I only require you to consider that someone is recreating the conditions of the past. Japp frowned. An illusion. A reconstruction. Poirot corrected. A memory made physical. And someone with great means, is orchestrating it. Japp glanced toward the mirror fragment. And this? Poirot stood and turned it carefully under the light. The glass reflects not just image, but sequence. I believe it holds remnants, echoes, perhaps even a temporal residue from the event it witnessed. Japp gave a short laugh. Temporal residue? You've been reading too many of those French journals. Poirot gave a slight smile. Mais non. I have been receiving letters. That afternoon, a fifth letter arrived. Unlike the others, this one bore a seal, wax, midnight blue, pressed with a symbol, a clock face, cracked precisely where the number 2 should have been. Poirot opened it slowly. Inside, as always, were lines typed with impeccable symmetry. Memory is not imagination, Monsieur Poirot. It is repetition. It is rehearsal. And some memories, if repeated long enough, become inevitable again. You are walking the ledger backwards. But every archivist must eventually find their own name. Come to the library, the one below the city. where the air smells of salt. Bring the mirror piece. Number 23. Poirot tapped the final word lightly. The library below the city. There was only one place that matched such a description. Beneath Blackfriars Station, at the edge of the Thames, was a private archive known to few. Once part of a monastic order, later repurposed during the war to protect historical records, and now locked away under layers of bureaucratic secrecy. The entrance was hidden behind a rusted maintenance gate near the bridge. Poirot, coat buttoned, mirror fragment in pocket, descended alone through a winding iron staircase until he reached the main vault, a room carved from stone, lined with endless drawers, thick volumes, and sealed crates marked and indexed. There, in the center of the room, was a single table, and upon it, a ledger. The ledger was bound in green leather, cracked at the spine. Its title had been erased. Poirot opened it slowly. The pages were filled with names, dates, locations, like a census crossed with confessionals. But what struck Poirot most was the pattern. Every seventh page listed only one name, and every name ended in a question. Marguerite La Fontaine. Why did she teach what she taught? Felix Rennick. Why did he listen when others forgot? Eleanor Gray. Why did she send the second letter? Miss Violet. Why did she remember the fire? And then, Hercule Poirot. Why are you solving what must remain buried? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Say impossible. He turned the page. Nothing more. But the mirror fragment in his pocket had grown warm. He placed it upon the open book. The ink on the page shifted. Letters relined. A new line formed. Return to the first reflection. Poirot spoke aloud. The mirror clock. There was only one man who knew more about the mirror mechanism than anyone living. Lucien Duray, the horologist recluse in Calais whom Poirot had encountered years prior during a separate affair. If the device had been part of a failed experiment in reflective timekeeping, as Poirot suspected, Lucien would have the notes. Poirot sent a coded telegram that afternoon. The reply came within 3 hours. Do not come to Calais. The house is moving. LD. It made little sense. But the meaning was clear. The mystery was no longer at rest. Poirot stayed awake late into the night. The Remington typewriter open on his desk. He rolled a sheet into the carriage and typed. What is the purpose of the house? A long silence followed. Then, without his fingers touching the keys, the response began to appear. To bind what should not roam. To trap what was never born. Number 23 was never a house. It was a vault. And you have broken the lock. Poirot inhaled slowly. Then, with deliberate calm, he typed. Who are you really? No reply. Only a single phrase typed with slow, uneven pressure. Look inside the ledger again. Poirot returned to the underground library the next day. The ledger was where he had left it. Open, inert, waiting. He flipped through until he reached the page listing his own name. And there, beneath the typed question, was a handwritten sentence. You solved the mirror case in 1913. Poirot felt the chill of the stones beneath his feet. He had not solved the case in 1913. Not officially, but there had been an incident, a fire, a vanishing tenant, an abandoned lot. He had dismissed it at the time. No body, no evidence, only whispers of a woman with a fractured mirror and a missing page from a diary. He had been younger then, less willing to chase phantoms. Now he knew better. Some cases return not when they are unsolved, but when they are ignored. Back at his flat, Poirot arranged all the artifacts upon the table. The ledger, the mirror shard, the Remington, the letters, each a relic, each a reminder. He turned to the mirror shard once more and whispered, What did I miss? The mirror, silent and unremarkable, did not respond. But the air in the room changed, and behind Poirot, on the wall, a shadow appeared. Not of a man, but of a room with a chandelier, and a mirror, and a girl. Poirot closed his eyes. He remembered it now. The girl in 1913 had not cried. She had not screamed. She had simply stared into the mirror and spoken 2 words. It remembers. Chapter 6. The Reflection Engine. Time moves differently when it loops. This was the thought that lingered with Poirot the morning after the shadow of the house had returned to his wall. It wasn't merely a trick of light. He had measured it, 3 feet wide, 8 feet high. The dimensions of a door frame. But there was no door. Only wall. Only silence. Yet, he had seen it before. In Calais. In 1913. Back when he was still considered a rising detective, unburdened by myth and moustaches. It had been his first case that refused to end, not because it went unsolved, but because it vanished. The fire at Harper Lane. The girl in the mirror. The whisper that said, "It remembers." He had buried the memory, or tried to. Now it returned with the weight of consequence, and it demanded he revisit the one man who had once tried to explain it, not in words, but in design. Lucien Duret was waiting. His workshop, a crumbling observatory hidden within the limestone cliffs outside Calais, had not changed. Dust, silence, clocks frozen mid-chime. The scent of iron filings and oil. Lucien stood in the center, wrapped in a shawl, thin as parchment. He gestured for Poirot to sit without a word. Poirot placed a mirror shard on the table. Lucien stared, then spoke in a whisper. "You brought it back." "None," Poirot replied. "It returned on its own." Lucien nodded, as if this were inevitable. "I built the reflection engine for Marguerite," Lucien said softly, as he unfolded a map, part schematic, part diary. She was not merely a teacher. She was a listener, one of the lost. "Of what?" asked Poirot. "Of old coordinates. Memories unanchored by time." She called them ghost echoes, places that were once real but now drifted between perception and forgetting. He pointed to the diagram, a mirrored chamber, powered not by electricity, but by rhythm. Ticking. Repetition. Poirot leaned closer. "The mechanism used 4 inputs," Lucien said. "A mirror, a typewriter, a clock that chimed at the 13th hour, and one final element." He looked at Poirot. "You." Back in 1913, Poirot had visited number 23 to investigate a report of missing time. Not missing persons, not arson, but a clock that struck 13. A girl who claimed she saw her future self in a mirror. And a woman, Marguerite, who swore her typewriter recorded dreams. Poirot had found nothing conclusive, and so the case was shelved. But now it seemed the entire house had been a containment device, designed not to hide a person, but to lock away a memory so dangerous it had to be sealed in ritual. Lucien placed a 4th object on the table, a small silver gear. "Made from the pendulum of a clock that never ticked," he explained. "It completes the engine." Poirot examined the gear. Etched upon it were 5 letters, EIEST. An acronym. Poirot asked. Lucien shook his head. "No, a word. Forgotten." With Lucien's reluctant blessing, Poirot returned to London that same night. He now had all 4 components. The mirror shard, memory. The Remington, transcription. The silver gear, stillness. And himself, the observer. He returned to the Harper Lane site at midnight. The doorframe shadow had returned, precisely where it had appeared in his flat. Except now, it glowed faintly. He approached, laid the mirror shard into the earth. Nothing. Then, he placed the gear atop the mirror. The air shifted, and the door opened. Inside was not the house, not in the way it had appeared before. This time, it was incomplete, floating fragments of rooms, a ceiling that blinked like an eye, chairs suspended mid-motion. A corridor turned sideways, a fireplace that breathed. It was a memory fractured, halfway between reality and echo. Poirot stepped inside. Each step sounded like two. One now, one then. The floorboards creaked in reverse. He moved toward the only fixed point, the mirror at the center of the chamber. But this time, it was covered. He removed the cloth slowly. The mirror reflected not his face, but the ledger from the underground archive. Page 7. His name. And underneath it, new writing formed. This is the story you forgot. The one that made you who you are. Solve it, and you lose yourself. Ignore it, and the others vanish. Choose. Poirot blinked. He spoke aloud. What is the truth? The mirror flickered, then revealed a scene. 1913. A woman at the typewriter. Marguerite. Her fingers move rapidly. Her eyes dart behind her, to the mirror. Behind her, a girl, barely 12, reading silently, lips forming words she cannot understand. The typewriter halts. The mirror glows. Marguerite turns. And then, fire, but not flame, not heat. Light, pure and bright and shattering, explodes from the mirror. Time collapses. The girl screams, but only silence comes out. And then, stillness. The room freezes. Marguerite reaches for the gear. Too late. The room vanishes. Poirot gasped. He was still in the mirror chamber. But now it too was fading. One wall at a time. He stepped back toward the door, the only real thing. And then he saw her, Miss Violet, standing at the doorway, watching him. She spoke. You were the one who arrived too late. You always arrive too late. Poirot opened his mouth. But she was gone. Back in his flat, the Remington typewriter had begun typing on its own. Not lines, but names. Marguerite Lafontaine, Eleanor Gray, Felix Rennick, Violet L., Hercule Poirot. And then, the final archivist must remember what he buried. Poirot sat in silence. He now understood. Number 23 was not a house. It was a sequence, a machine made from memory, built across decades. Each of them, Marguerite, Eleanor, Violet, had been caretakers, transcribers of an event too large, too impossible to hold alone. And now the final burden was his. To see the truth, to name it, to write it. He returned once more to the underground archive beneath Blackfriars. This time, the ledger was already open. His name was not alone. Another line had been added beneath it. The mirror did not lie. It only remembered. Poirot whispered, "Then I must remember too." And with that, he opened a new page. He began to write, not to solve a case, but to release a story. The one he had once feared would consume him. Now, it was the only way forward. Chapter 7. The House That Wrote Itself. It was often said of Hercule Poirot that he never forgot a detail, that once seen, nothing ever slipped past the recesses of his extraordinary mind. But what, then, of the things he had chosen not to remember? What of the rooms glimpsed only once? Strange, incomplete rooms in a house that didn't belong to any map. What of the girl who had spoken through silence? What of the case he had walked away from in 1913, with no arrest, no cops, no motive, and no end? On the 7th night since the first letter arrived, Poirot returned to his writing desk, not to investigate, but to confess. The Remington typewriter was already waiting. Its ribbon was new. The keys were clean, and yet it had typed things no man should have seen. Not predictions, not riddles, but memories, ones Poirot hadn't lived yet. And so, with a single breath, he sat today, and he began to write, not as Hercule Poirot, detective, but as the last archivist of number 23. The first words came easily. The house wrote itself. He paused, then continued, not from brick nor wood, but from recurrence. Every echo was a beam, every memory a stay. It did not need blueprints, only witnesses. And when they gathered, it returned. Not to live, but to be solved. Poirot sat back. He didn't remember writing those words, but they were true. He had seen it now. The house was not haunted by spirits, but by unfinished stories. The following morning, a sixth letter arrived. This one had no envelope, only a thin sheet, typed as before, but with a new urgency. The house is nearly whole. You are the final keystone. What was buried in 1913 must be unearthed at midnight on the 13th day. Only then can the mirror be broken. Only then can the typewriter go silent. You know where to go. At the bottom, a date, October 13th. Just 2 days from now. Poirot folded the letter slowly, so it would come full circle, in the place where it began. Harper Lane. The lot was still empty, at least to anyone else. But Poirot no longer trusted his eyes, or the world's, because as he walked the perimeter, measuring every step, counting the foundation lines still visible in the overgrown grass, he realized something extraordinary. The measurements were identical, not similar, identical, to the dimensions of his flat, room by room, window by window. Even the fireplace matched. Poirot turned in a slow circle, imagining it all. And then he saw her, Violet, standing at the edge of the foundation. This time, she did not vanish. Her voice was soft, almost tired. You returned. Poirot said nothing. Violet walked along the invisible hallway between them. You don't remember, do you? Not fully. Poirot stepped forward. Help me. She looked up. You were there, in 1913. The fire started because the memory was activated out of order. Marguerite tried to contain it. But someone else, someone watching, broke the seal too soon. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Who? Violet only pointed. To the eastern wall, where the nursery once stood. Poirot walked to it. There, in the grass, was a mirror fragment. But this one was different. Etched along its curve was the word, ellipsum, Latin. It meant, that which returns. Back at his flat, Poirot laid the new shard beside the others. There were now 3, each fragment from a mirror that had not shattered from impact, but from repetition. Each time it returned, it remembered more. Each time he solved the piece, it rebuilt itself. And now, with the house nearly whole again, the final mystery had begun to surface. Not of who had sent the letters, not even of what had burned in 1913, but of why he, Hercule Poirot, had been chosen to forget it. The Remington began typing again. Poirot stood in silence. The paper fed itself. Lines appeared. You were the last visitor before the fire. You saw the girl. You watched the mirror fracture. You chose to walk away. You were the final archivist, but you closed the book. Poirot whispered aloud, because I didn't understand. The typewriter responded. Now you do. Poirot felt a chill. Somewhere, deep in his memory, the echo of that night returned. He had not walked away because there was no mystery. He had walked away because the mystery looked back. He closed his eyes. He saw Marguerite at her desk, burning the pages one by one. He saw Violet, not as she was now, but as a child, hiding behind the fireplace, whispering words into a broken recorder. He saw himself, standing at the threshold, unwilling to enter, because to enter meant to see everything, and to see everything meant to become part of it. Poirot stood, gathered the mirror shards, the ledger, the typewriter. He would go back to Harper Lane one final time. But this time, he wouldn't be investigating. He would be remembering. Because number 23 was not simply a house that returned. It was a story left unfinished. And now, with only one night left before the 13th day, the pen was in his hand. Chapter 8, The Mirror Hour. Some clocks do not tick, they wait. Midnight had always been Poirot's preferred hour of thought. But as October 13th drew its final breath and the city of London dozed under its cloak of drizzle, Poirot sat alone, not at his desk, not at the Remington typewriter, but before a mirror. Not just any mirror. The reassembled shards of number 23's broken glass now stood complete, bound together by nothing visible, no frame, no glue, only intention. Each fragment had returned to its place as if obeying a command written into the fabric of the case itself. And as a minute hand crept past 11:59, Poirot understood. Midnight would not arrive tonight. Something else would. The typewriter remained silent. But the mirror pulsed. It did not reflect. It remembered. Poirot leaned forward. He saw not himself, but a version of his flat, reversed, candlelit, and unfamiliar. A different time. Inside, sitting exactly where he sat now, was himself, 20 years younger. Mustache darker, shoulders straighter, eyes full of confidence. And behind that younger self, walking slowly toward the desk, was Marguerite. She placed a hand on the young Poirot's shoulder. She said something. The mirror distorted. Sound was impossible, but Poirot read her lips. Don't let it repeat. Then the light changed. The candle behind her flickered, and when it stilled, Violet stood in her place. Now older, now silent. She held out a key, not to a lock, but to a room Poirot had never entered, and now must. He stood, dressed carefully, picked up the key, real now, cold and metallic. It bore no teeth, no grooves, only a symbol, an eye inside a mirror. And beneath it, one word. Archivum. Latin. The archive. Poirot did not call Jap, did not notify Scotland Yard. Some mysteries do not belong to the law. Some mysteries are the law, old ones. Before governments, before names. At precisely 12:13, the time he had seen etched into the mirror's pedestal weeks ago, Poirot arrived at Harper Lane. The lot was gone. In its place stood number 23. Whole, restored. The lights were on, the curtains drawn. A gentle waltz echoed from within, as if a party were just ending or had never begun. Poirot did not hesitate. He stepped inside. The entryway smelled of candle wax and books. Dust floated like breath in the air, but the floor was swept. The grandfather clock ticked, but its hands spun backward. On the left wall, portraits hung, but their faces were missing, blurred beyond recognition. Poirot moved toward the study. The furniture was familiar. It had been his once. In a dream? In a memory? He no longer knew. What he did know was that he had been here before. And now, it waited. On the desk was a letter addressed to no one. Typed, of course. He unfolded it. You walked away once, Monsieur Poirot. You closed the mirror before it finished showing you the truth. Tonight, the final entry must be written. Below the house is the engine. You are its last caretaker. Number 23 must forget what it holds, or it will begin to remember itself forever. At the bottom, the type shifted. Just one word appeared, typed in fresh ink. Downstairs. The cellar was not in the blueprints. Poirot found it behind a swinging bookcase, cliché, but precise. He descended slowly. The air thickened. The stays creaked backward, up before down. And then he reached it. A chamber, metal-lined, circular, lit by oil lamps that flickered not from flame but from breath. At its center, the mirror engine. It was not a machine in the traditional sense. It had no gears, no wires. It was built of moments. A circular frame, empty in its middle, suspended by strings made of silver thread, each one vibrating gently with soundless frequency. Around the base, typewriter keys, hundreds of them, forming a ring. In the center, an hourglass. The sand within ran upward. Poirot stepped forward. A voice greeted him, not aloud, in his mind, not words, memories. The laughter of Violet as a child, the scream he never heard in 1913, the fire that made no smoke. the clock that struck the 13th hour, and then paused. He saw Marguerite, writing frantically, saw himself, younger, confused, refusing to believe. So the house began to collapse into itself, not from heat, but from loop. A loop that had been broken when he walked away. But now the loop was nearing completion. Unless he chose. The mirror engine offered him two paths. On the left, a switch marked forget. On the right, a switch marked record. To forget was to seal the house again, to stop its return, to bury the memory. To record was to release the memory, to publish the truth. But once recorded, it could not be undone. History would change. Not events, but belief. Poirot, for once, did not trust his mind. He closed his eyes. He remembered Violet's final words in the mirror. You always arrive too late. He opened his eyes and chose. He pulled the record switch. The mirror engine did not explode, did not roar. It simply began to type. The keys lit up, one by one, in a perfect circle. And then, from nowhere, a piece of paper emerged. Only one. On it. This was never a case. It was a correction. Number 23 was built to preserve a timeline that never should have been. Its witnesses were chosen. Its memory guarded. But all stories must end. And to end, they must be told. Poirot stepped back. The mirror frame cracked. Not violently, but gently, like old ice. The sand in the hourglass stopped, then fell both ways. He turned, climbed the stairs, and left the house. In the morning, Harper Lane was a field again. No house, no cellar, only a circle in the grass, faint, damp, and silent. Back in his flat, the Remington was gone. In its place, the final letter. Merci, monsieur. You gave it its ending. Now, we can rest. At the bottom, the archivist of number 23. Chapter 9, The Final Ledger. Some endings do not arrive with a bang, nor even with silence. Some arrive like ink on old paper, slow, deliberate, irreversible. And as dawn peeled the mist off the Thames, Hercule Poirot understood that his role in the mystery of number 23 had not been to solve a crime, but to witness a reckoning. A restoration of something older than reason, something older than time itself. Yet the house was gone. The typewriter had vanished. The mirror, fractured and quiet, rested in his study, no longer glowing, no longer whispering. The mystery should have ended. But it hadn't, because that morning, a knock came at his door, and with it, a box. No name, no address, only the number 23 pressed into its wax seal. Poirot hesitated only a moment before opening it. Inside was a single object, a ledger. Bound in cracked leather, it bore no title. Its spine was worn to softness. Its pages were brittle but unmarred. And at its center, precisely halfway through, lay a pressed violet flower. Poirot lifted the flower. Beneath it, a line of handwriting in faded blue ink. This is the final record. What is written here cannot be unwritten. Choose carefully. Below it, a blank page. Poirot had seen this ledger before. Once, in the archive beneath Blackfriars, in the hidden chamber where time had seemed to bend. But this one was older. Its scent different. A faint trace of burned paper and cold stone. And unlike the first, this one responded to him. He turned the page. Text appeared, not printed, not typed, but forming on the parchment, as though it were remembering itself in his presence. The words swirled, then settled. Case file number 000, the Harper loop. Status, resolved, re-entered, pending. Poirot blinked. What did it mean? Re-entered? He turned another page and found something chilling. His name, in full. Poirot, Hercule. Role, Observer Archivist. Date of first entry, October 1913. Date of loop, October 13th, 1913 to October 13th, 1943, October 13th, 1973. Last completion, undocumented. Poirot closed the ledger softly. Loop. 3 entries, all 30 years apart. And now, in 2003, precisely 30 years since the last unrecorded loop, it had begun again. He felt the weight of time press against him. Not metaphor, but design. As if he had been walking the path of this cycle unknowingly, led back every 3 decades to the edge of a question never fully answered. He looked out the window. The rain had returned, but the shadows it cast were no longer random. On the opposite wall, the outline of a door frame shimmered faintly. Again, Poirot returned to the mirror. The fractured frame, the ghost of a reflection. But this time, it held no visions of the past. Only his own face. Aged, worn, but resolute. The ledger lay on the desk beside it. He opened it once more. Now, a new line had appeared. Typed, not handwritten. If the observer becomes the author, the story concludes. Below it, to conclude, write your truth. Poirot picked up his fountain pen. He hesitated only a moment, and then began. There are mysteries that begin with murder, and others that begin with memory. This one began with both. In 1913, I was sent to Harper Lane to investigate a fire with no source. There was no body, no flames, no smoke, only a house reduced to ash and a girl who claimed to have seen her own reflection scream before the fire began. The file was closed, but the story never ended, because every 30 years, the house returned. So did the girl. So did I. Poirot paused. His hand trembled. The mirror darkened slightly, then held steady. He continued. Each time, the house rebuilt itself from fragments of memory. Witnesses were drawn to it. Letters arrived. The engine activated, and a choice had to be made. Forget or remember. In 1913, I chose to forget. In 1943, I was not chosen. In 1973, the loop failed to complete. And now, in 2003, I have remembered. Fully. This is the final ledger. The story is whole. And it ends here. He signed his name beneath the final line. The moment the ink dried, the mirror cracked, not in violence, but in relief. The ledger closed on its own, and the shadow on the wall vanished completely. The following morning, Poirot's flat felt different. No letters arrived. The Remington was nowhere to be found. Number 23 did not return to Harper Lane. But something else did. As Poirot stood preparing tea, he heard a knock at the door. This time, it was a young woman. Late 20s. Serious eyes. Rain-soaked coat. She introduced herself as Violet, not the girl from the visions, but her granddaughter. "My grandmother left this for you," she said, handing over a sealed envelope. Poirot opened it. Inside, a single sentence. "Thank you for giving us back our story." Violet nodded. She said you'd understand. Poirot smiled gently. "I do." He sat alone that night by the fireplace. No ledger, no mirror, no typewriter, only the memory of a mystery that had written itself through time, and ended only when it had been told truthfully. And as the flames danced low, Hercule Poirot, the final archivist, whispered to no one in particular. There is no crime in remembering, but there is tragedy in forgetting. And with that, the story closed. Completely. Chapter 10. The Archivist's Silence. Some endings are loud, others gentle, but a few arrive not as thunderclaps, nor as whispers, but as a silence so complete it closes every door, every letter, and every echo that ever lingered. And so it was with number 23. The house had vanished. The mirror had cracked. The ledger had closed. And now, as autumn sank fully into London's bones, Hercule Poirot sat beneath his modest desk lamp, neither reflecting nor mourning, but listening, not for more clues, but for the absence of them. And in that quiet, he found the truest revelation of all. He was no longer part of the mystery. The story no longer needed him. Yet something remained. A faint pull, like the memory of a room you once lived in. The kind of room that you dream about, long after you've moved on, and wake in the middle of the night half convinced you're still there. Poirot lit a candle. No gas lamp. No switch. A flame, old and honest. He opened his casebook, the real one, not the phantom ledger. And inside it, he placed a small object wrapped in linen. The final key. He had never used it. Not once. The mirror engine had activated without it. The archive had opened on memory alone. And yet, this key had never left his side. Until now. He would mail it. To no one. A locked box at King's Cross waited. One he had rented in another name, 20 years prior. He no longer remembered why. But now, he did. The loop had ended. But memory deserved a resting place. Not hidden. Preserved. Later that evening, as the rain struck in murmuring rhythms against the glass, Poirot walked the quiet length of Harper Lane. No house stood there, just tall grass and the faint outline of stone beneath the soil. And yet, he felt watched, not with menace, but with knowing. And from the center of the lot, where the house had once stood, where he had first seen Violet in the mirror, he found something impossible. A letter, fresh, typed, no stamp, no envelope, only the page. He read it by lightning. Monsieur Poirot, you were never meant to solve us. You were meant to remember us. You did. The house is closed. The archivist rests. And the mirror, finally, forgets. Farewell, the keepers of the loop. Poirot stood motionless. He folded the letter slowly, deliberately, and then, for the first time in his long career, he let a clue blow away in the wind. Back in his flat, nothing flickered. No strange hums. No typewriter movements. Only stillness. Poirot poured himself a modest glass of port and returned to the chair beneath the Rembrandt print he so loved, the one with the empty chair and the darkened door. He spoke softly to the room, as if it might speak back. Why do some stories choose to remember themselves? There was no reply, only the quiet tick of a very normal clock. He smiled. That was enough. In the following weeks, Poirot turned down cases. Unsolved murders arrived in his mail. Political scandals begged for his mind. Stolen paintings, ciphered journals, a diamond hidden in a piano. He said no to them all, because something in him knew. His role as detective had paused, perhaps forever. He had crossed into the realm of something older, something deeper than law. Story and stories, once completed, changed their tellers. In December, he visited Jap for dinner. The inspector had grown rounder, slower, but his eyes still twinkled at Poirot's quirks. You've been quiet lately, Jap said between mouthfuls of roast. Poirot nodded. Sometimes, the loudest things are those we do not speak. Jap laughed. Still cryptic. Are you? Poirot smiled, and said nothing more. That night, back at home, Poirot made one final entry in his private notebook. Not a case file, not a confession, just a quote. He wrote, "Some truths do not wait to be discovered. They wait to be believed." Beneath it, he added the date, October 13th, 2003. Then, he closed the notebook and placed it in a locked drawer. The same drawer where he kept his silver tie pin and the untouched bottle of 1910 cognac. Years passed. The letters stopped. The name number 23 faded into obscure records, then vanished entirely. The house was never rebuilt. Harper Lane became a park. Children played where the archive had once whispered. They did not hear the mirror. They did not feel the loop. They only laughed. And for Hercule Poirot, that was peace enough. On a spring morning in 2010, long after the final key had been mailed, and the box at King's Cross sealed for good, a young archivist opened a forgotten file in the Metropolitan Library. Inside were only 4 items: a copy of Poirot's notebook, a photograph of a broken mirror, the key, and a final page, handwritten in new perfect script. It read, "The case was never a case. It was a bridge, and once crossed, it must never be built again." The archivist turned the page. It was blank, and then, under the desk lamp, a faint line appeared. Not ink, but heat, and just one word: remember. And so, the final letter has been written. The case closed not with handcuffs, but with silence. If this story stayed with you, if the shadows of number 23 still echo in your mind, then let them find others to whisper to. Crescent Moon subscribe to Moonlight Audio for more mysteries wrapped in memory, time, and shadows. Tap the bell so you never miss the next case that days to surface from the forgotten. Thumbs up sign like this story if it stirred your curiosity. Speech balloon share it with fellow seekers of secrets. Scroll and let us know, what truth did you take from the letters? Until the next hour chimes, sleep well, and remember, some stories are never truly over.